It's my pleasure to welcome this group to our first virtual TIM AOM Graduate Student Consortia. And so first I'd like to express thanks to Mahka and to Michael for their efforts in moving the programming online. This has been a Herculean effort and totally unexpected. For many of you, this will be your first time attending the Academy, and this is a different experience, but we hope that this will be a good introduction to the variety of topics that we focus on at the Technology and Innovation Management Focus Group, and then also to begin to introduce you to various people. Joe Mahoney used to say that it is important what you know, and certainly you have to be solid on what you know. And it's also important who you know, but that the most important thing is that who you know knows what you know. And so this is your first opportunity to interact with our community. This will be an experiment, but let me encourage you to stay engaged and to reach out to all of us who are involved with the Academy of Management.
Welcome to the 2020 Technology and Innovation Management Doctoral Consortium. Bikard and I have the pleasure to be the co-chairs of this year's Doctoral Consortium. We were very much looking forward to meeting you in person in Vancouver. However, given the circumstances, we're pleased to have put together a virtual version of this consortium. We are also delighted to welcome you to the TIM division. You are the next generation of TIM scholars. During the consortium, we'll look forward to learning about the research that you're doing and helping you towards achieving your research and career advancement goals. We hope that you find this experience a valuable one.
Welcome to the 2020 Virtual Doctoral Consortium of the TIM division. Mahka and I are extremely pleased to have you join us this year. This is a very strange year to have a doctoral consortium, and we've tried our best to bring a bunch of really great faculty mentors and put together a program that would be short and sweet so that people from different parts of the world are able to connect and get to speak with each other and have the usual interactions, even though we're all on lockdown somewhere in the world. So I'm extremely excited that you could make it, and I look forward to a half day of highly inspiring interactions with you.
The consortium includes two parts. In the first part, we have compiled a series of video interviews, during which faculty mentors will share their advice and insights about several topics of your interest. These include finishing your dissertation, preparing for an academic job market, and transitioning from the PhD life to faculty life. In the second part, we will meet live on Friday. You will get the opportunity to socialize with your peer doctoral students as well as faculty mentors. The program will additionally include a keynote speech by Professor Rita Ketila. Rita is the Keck Foundation faculty scholar and professor at Stanford University. You'll also get the chance to ask questions during the faculty in Q&A panel with regard to the topics that are discussed in videos that might have inspired additional thoughts and follow-ups. We will have two roundtables when you'll get the chance to meet one-to-one with faculty mentors in the session and other doctoral students. One roundtable revolves around research feedback. The second roundtable is our visioning exercise. By now, all of you have submitted your Horizon 2025 exercise. Faculty mentors are now reviewing that exercise and look forward to giving you feedback about how you can achieve your envisioned research plan over the next 5 years.
Hi, I'm Colleen Cunningham. I'm an assistant professor of strategy and entrepreneurship at London Business School. I've been a professor there for 3 years. I'm starting my 4th year. And so I did my dissertation and PhD at Duke University. My advisor was Ashish Arora, and I study markets for technology. So most of my research is on transaction between firms around technologies, patents, et cetera. And I study in particular, usually medical industry, so both medical devices and pharmaceuticals. So one of my key areas of research right now is on a topic called killer acquisitions. It's a paper on the phenomena of killer acquisitions, which is when firms have incentives to buy nascent potential competitors in order specifically to shut down the development of these startups' potential technology that will come to compete with the incumbents.
So my name is Raj Chaudhary. I'm an associate professor at the Harvard Business School, and I study this topic that I call the geography of work, which entails 2 or 3 streams. So I've been studying the topic of geographic mobility and how it affects productivity for a while. And I'm increasingly interested in not only mobility, but also immobility, what causes people not to move, which could be regulatory, which could be economic, and many other reasons. And then the final stream within that geography of work research is looking at geographic flexibility that is being offered through remote work programs, such as work from anywhere. So what has consumed my time over the past several weeks is that last stream, because remote work has been thrust upon us.
So, hello, I'm Hakan Özal. I'm an assistant professor at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam at the KIN Research Group. And my research involves mostly about the platforms in combination with industry evolution. And in my studies, I generally draw upon also either modularity or organization learning. And my research on overall, I think, tries to explain how do firms, let's say on a platform, whether they are complementers or whether they are users, how they adapt and react to changes in the broader technological environment and also in the broader industrial environment. Even the platforms are based on an industry, or at least in my case, which is I am very much interested in the video game industry. They are actually in this industry context, which evolves a lot, and therefore the platform strategies and the players in these platforms also change dramatically.
My name is Mahka Moeen. I'm an associate professor of strategy and entrepreneurship at the University of North Carolina. In my research, I'm interested to understand how firms create and enter new industries. So questions that are at the intersection of firm entry strategy and industry emergence are very interesting to me. In my existing studies, I've been mostly looking at the time window between a firm's first investment in an industry until the time that they reach the commercialization milestone. From a firm perspective, this is a time window that allows us to understand what type of pre-entry capabilities and cognitive frames founders and firms bring with a new industry, and how is it that they shape their capability portfolio before having a product on the market. From an industry perspective, this time window introduces a new stage in the industry life cycle that I like to call the incubation stage of an industry, which could be the time window from the first trigger of industry emergence in terms of a technological breakthrough or understanding of an unmet demand until a relevant product is commercialized on the market. And the duration and vibrancy of activity during this industry incubation area is something that I've been paying a lot of attention to.
Hi, I'm Mikael from INSEAD, and my research focuses on the antecedent of creativity, mostly focusing on scientific research. I am interested in why we collaborate, and especially how we strive to get credit for what we do. And the other stream of my work focuses on the commercialization of science and what happens to new knowledge. What are the circumstances under which new knowledge is translated into new technologies or being used by firms? And to do that, I study simultaneous discoveries to do twin studies of new knowledge.
So I'm an associate professor of innovation management, entrepreneurship, and technology strategy at the National University of Singapore. So I work on research related to innovation management and entrepreneurship. In particular, I look at emerging economies, emerging markets, new ways of organizing, and emerging technologies. So emerging markets, in particular, pay attention to the China market, and I think about formal, informal institutions, like IPR regulation, intellectual property rights strategy, how that interact with informal institutions like culture and norms, and how that together shape firms' innovation activities and innovation performance.
So my name is Callan Anthony. I'm an assistant professor at in the Management and Organizations Department at NYU Stern. My research focuses on the intersection between cognition and innovation. So I study the emergence and use of new technologies at both the field industry level as well as within organizations. My methods are primarily qualitative, so I use a mix of ethnographic and inductive approaches, both within organizations as well as archival historical approaches.
Hi, my name is Abhishek Nagraj. I'm an assistant professor in management and organizations at the Haas School of Business at the University of California in Berkeley. My research broadly is at the intersection of technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, and the digital economy. In particular, I'm very interested in the impact of new kinds of digital information on innovation and entrepreneurship. In particular, I look at the impact of geographic information or maps on innovative outcomes within industries. My job market paper and my dissertation looked at the impact of satellite imagery produced by NASA on shaping the discovery of new gold deposits and the starting of new firms in the gold mining industry. What I showed is that the availability of new information can dramatically shape how industries evolve. It can lead to new discoveries, but in particular, increase the market share of smaller firms. More broadly in my work, I'm super excited and interested about how the arrival of big data and other kinds of new information is shaping innovation, entrepreneurship, and the implications that it has for strategic management and for managers.
Hi everyone, my name is Reddy Kotta. I'm an associate professor at Singapore Management University. I have a PhD from London Business School. I graduated in 2007. I've been at SMU for the past 13 years. I work on innovation and entrepreneurship. Post-tenure, what I've been doing is I've been trying to take interventions to the practice, into the field, and see how we can do interventions in the field to actually make a difference, especially in the case of entrepreneurship. So I have one project with my colleague Bala Visa from INSEAD, where we selected a pool of 200 entrepreneurs, put them in using a randomized control training framework, RCT framework, put them in treatment and control training system, and then we do an intervention, and then we track them over a period of 12 months to see what happens, what is the impact of our training intervention on their performance. So projects like this are really interesting for me.
Being in your third year is super exciting because you're done like the coursework and you're starting on your dissertation, but it's also, at least for me, it was one of the toughest periods of the process, in part because you know what your topic is going to be, and you probably have like some idea of the theory and you have like maybe some sense of the data, but there's just so much narrowing that needs to happen before you get a job market paper. So it still kind of feels like you're close, but also at the same time super far away. So what worked for me in terms of getting from, let's say, that third year where you have your topic, your theoretical angles are kind of mapped out, and maybe you have some data, to finishing the dissertation and getting a job market paper, was to cycle through a bunch of different ideas. So effectively, I would write out 1 or 2 pagers of, what is the research question? What are some hypotheses that I want to test? If I want to test those hypotheses, what is the data set that I'm going to use? And what is, what does that regression, that first regression kind of look like that's going to get me the answer? And I think probably the most important part was, what will be the contribution if I get an answer to the question that I want to ask? And then I would ask either my advisor or other people on my committee, even other PhD students, to look at the 1-pager and tell me what they think. And I think I cycled through maybe 10 of those 1-pagers before I got to maybe the thing before my job market paper where I could iterate in that space. So that's one thing, I think, when you're in that sort of in-between zone, putting structure on that and forcing yourself to think, like, what is the question? And how will that be a contribution if I'm able to execute on that question? That would be my sort of main bit of advice.
Probably the most exciting, but also the most scary part of your PhD will be once you've finished your qualifying exams and taken your classes and embarked on the journey to find your original dissertation topic. Typically, this happens around the 3rd year. And everyone says that we don't know what happens during the 3rd year, but it takes about a year, right? So you'll often feel that you're spinning your wheels or not doing anything concrete, but understand that that's actually an important part of the process in discovering what it is that you want to work on. And it's okay to spend some time before you jump in to what's going to be not only your dissertation, but the next 5 years of your research life. Once you get your job, you'll be working on publishing these papers and working on related topics. So it makes sense to take some time to think carefully about what it is that you want your dissertation to be about. So my first piece of advice would be to take your time before jumping in and launching into a dissertation topic. The second, once you've kind of narrowed down an area of dissertation, take a step back and think more broadly about an entire set of questions that relate to that topic, rather than thinking directly about an identification strategy or even data collection. So think about what the big questions are in that area and how you can scope out the top 3 or 4 questions that you might want to answer in that area, and then think about selecting the top 1 or 2 questions that you would actually go after. This is also a really good time to understand the phenomenon that you're studying through interviews, archival work, talking to industry participants. And often that kind of groundwork can be very important, because come the time of running regressions or analyzing your interview data, it can prove to be very useful. It can also be a really good source of ideas on data sources that you might not know about, or even identification sources. So for example, in my dissertation work, I look at the impact of satellite imagery on the mining industry. And a key piece of my paper is the identification strategy that relies on the fact that in some places, images are not available because the satellites encounter clouds when they're taking images. I would have never discovered this fact if I was looking for an identification strategy, but instead it came from interviews with experts in the field who happened to mention that this was an impediment to their work. And so in this way, this kind of early groundwork can be useful not only to build your knowledge of the field, but also to give you very specific ideas on where to look for data or how to identify certain effects that you're looking after. So in this way, you want to combine an inductive approach with a more deductive approach that'll come later, assuming you're doing deductive work. And finally, once you're on your way in terms of dissertation work, it is often easy because it's often solo and difficult, it's often easy to not allocate enough time of the day to working on this project as compared to maybe a co-author project with your advisor or with your other PhD students. Often the difficult issues are solved with those projects and there's a lot more work to be done. But it's very important to be disciplined and say allocate 50% of your time to doing the difficult work of solo dissertation, while at the same time working on maybe another publication. So you want to balance working on original work and giving it time, while at the same time doing maybe TA work or collaborating with your advisor.
So to get the dissertation idea, I suggest to read widely. At least that was quite helpful for me. One of the key ideas in my dissertation was this idea of the simultaneous discoveries that could be used to do twin studies of new knowledge or new ideas. And that's an idea I got by getting interested in the science of science. So I'm grateful that I went and studied this topic, which might look quite different from what most people study in business schools, just because that actually led me to starting to think about simultaneous discoveries and how they were an interesting phenomenon that we really didn't know that much about, and etc. In terms of finishing your dissertation, I mean, I think the key is to there is no magic recipe in my mind. You just need to work hard. I think it's quite helpful to be entrepreneurial in getting feedback, knock on people's doors.
So once you have identified the theoretical gap in the literature in that area that really excites you, something that I find very helpful is to take a step back and often write down what is the ideal empirical design that allows me to address that research question. This could be in the form of a spreadsheet, when you document what could be the ideal dependent variable for your study, what could be the ideal independent variables, and the variety of alternative mechanisms that you need to rule out. Then taking these theoretical construct, the next step would be to identify the ideal measurement for these variables. Remember, this could be still a point that you don't know what is even the empirical context and industry within which you're going to address that question. But taking this ideal set of variables will then allow you to identify what is an appropriate industry and empirical context that will have enough of a variation across these variables for you to really understand and study the phenomenon that you seek to. After you have that ideal set of variables, another process and step that has often helped me is to then identify the feasible set of variables and the overall empirical design. So not only does this process allow you to break down the massive task of empirical design of your study into more manageable pieces, but also it makes you aware of the challenges and problems that your empirical design may have. The other thing that I've found helpful in the dissertation and subsequent research projects is to take a careful look at the empirical context and the data that I study. I don't mean data crunching. I mean reading about the historical evidence that exists about the empirical context, trying to talk with industry informants or reading their interviews, or trying to look at some basic summary statistics and trends in that data. Because an attribute of a good dissertation is this perfect match between theoretical contributions and the empirical context of the study. You want to have a seamless interface connecting the two of them together. And actually, when I was a lost doctoral student in the third year of my PhD program, this is really what helped me crystallize the research path that I wanted to undertake in my own dissertation. So I've been trying to replicate industry evolution charts in Gorton-Klepper 1982 paper as sort of the gold standard of what evolutionary paths of industries could be. It turned out that Gorton-Klepper and other industry evolution scholars have often focused on firms that had commercialized their products, whereas in agricultural biotechnology, the heterogeneity was not really between firms with a commercialized products. Instead, it was within firms that were thinking about commercialization, were involved in research experiments, but have not yet reached that stage. So looking at the data really helped me identify this important element and really build my research ideas and narrow them and fine-tune them with that perspective.
So I guess, you'll get a lot of advice from people who are way more senior than me and have seen way more doctoral students than I have. But I would say the following things. I would say in the dissertation format, if it's a 3-chapter format, it's very important to have at least one chapter, which is a solo authored chapter, which is your own work. And ideally, that work is probably, for most people, empirical at the doctoral stage. And I would say it's a good sort of policy to try to conduct your own experiment or collect your own data through field work, which could yield that chapter, but also many, many papers, at least 2 or 3 more papers beyond that. The one mistake I've seen doctoral students do is to just drop ideas because they work on it for a few weeks or a few months and then they don't like it anymore. So I realized that, you of course have to have an idea that you believe in and you like. But if you're too much of a perfectionist, then that might really sort of like come against you in terms of finishing this on time and being on the job market on time. So I would say, while picking that idea, be as thoughtful as possible, talk to as many people as possible, but having committed to it, complete it.
Okay, so the tips that I have for finishing up a dissertation are twofold. So one is to think about how to solicit feedback and advice from your committee and how to be the most strategic in your use of time and feedback from them. And the second is to think about how to balance multiple papers within the dissertation. So in the first sort of pasture of advice, I think one thing I found really, really helpful is I found that bringing materials to meetings with my committee members helped me to pinpoint feedback and reactions. So I would bring a sketch of a model, or I would bring, so my dissertation was qualitative, I would bring a table with quotes and, cut by different themes that I saw, and I would use this as sort of an anchoring device to sort of have a conversation about. And so this helped to keep the feedback out sort of the realm of, high level, this sounds good, to sort of very granular, what is your advice for how to move from this step to this step, or what's another cut I should think about in my data. And so this helped me to get feedback, not just on the big picture framing, but also in my processes for analyzing data and iterating between my data. So the second pasture of feedback or advice that I would offer in terms of finishing your dissertation is to think about how to balance your attention and focus across multiple papers. So my dissertation was 3 papers, 3 studies, all on the same topic, using the same data, sort of combined into one, answering one big research question. And a piece of advice I got actually when I was at the TIM Doctoral Consortium and is to think about managing the quality across these different papers in different sorts of ways. And so what I mean by that is you should attempt to max the quality of your max, not max the average or max the min, because you'll be primarily evaluated on the market based on one paper within your dissertation. So focus on getting your other papers sort of above the bar, or maybe earlier in the process of development, but really focus on honing in on that one paper. Have your one paper be the best it can be. So max your max quality, don't max your min, and don't max your mean.
I think I have a few advice to offer. When I did my PhD at MIT, my professors are very helpful, but at the same time, they're very busy, right? So I would encourage PhD students to actually reach out to faculties, and not only maybe, of course, your advisors, your dissertation committee members, but also other faculties in the school that you have contact with. Maybe you have served as a teaching assistant for one of the professor, and then the person can be a very also useful resource for you, right? And I think you have to be really proactive in strategizing, in planning this whole process. I tend to take a little bit more of a structured process to working on my dissertation. So have like a regular milestones. I think conferences and informal seminars are all very good ways to kind of push you forward, right? Like you're finishing up this one chapter or one essay, and then it's time to gather good feedbacks from also your colleagues, like your peer PhD students, whether in the years above or below, as well as, of course, your committee members who might be a bit busier, which is fine. And now with this, virtual online technologies, you can also form, informal help groups, right, with your PhD peers in other institutions, or even junior faculty or junior colleagues. So I would advise like a structured process, because things always take a bit longer than expected, right? In terms of the dissertation, I would tend to go with like construct a novel data set. For example, when I was at MIT, when I did my PhD dissertation, I had to code up the whole, the genomic patterns and match it to genomic publications. In the end, it came out well. We published a paper in AMJ in 2009. But the whole process took many months, right? And then I had to go online or other sources to find what are genomic patterns, collect, even like gene sequencing, and match that to the content or to the abstract to find whether a pattern or publication they match, and then also collect other data sources, right? So I think in the end, this kind of investment, I think it did pay off. So I was able to get good papers from this, and also subsequently build on this stream of research with other data. And always, I think it's good to have this, even in the whole thesis, have like 3 or 4 main chapters or 3 essays, which you can later break up, right, and then into separate papers, and that will serve you very well in the first few years of your career as a junior faculty, which you need to kind of rely on your dissertation research while starting on new projects.
My dissertation advice would be, as someone who changed his dissertation proposal 3 times, he's basically committed 3 times as well on the road, and finally adapting a topic. I think what's most important is that once you start your dissertation, your first study may not be your best study. So don't think that you should hold on to your first study, but you should always keep in mind, if something is not really reaching its potential as you think, and if you have other ideas which are much more clearer now because you have experience with your first study that is already building up, that you have this clear second study idea, I think it pays to take some of this risk, because I was holding on to my first study for a very long time, and it turned out it was not had this big potential on the market I was thinking of. But then my second study actually spawned off another study, and they are both published by the time I was trying to submit my first study. You should let yourself, I think, have this fine balance between these 2 thresholds. One threshold is the survival threshold, but you should also have your, I think, higher aspiration threshold, where once you feel you are done with the survival threshold, now you can aspire to go higher. And these are generally a good trade-off, which dissertation is not a final product as it is. It's a product that you should finish to hand in to graduate, and it's not a very low bar. That's still a bar that requires lots of work on it, but you should not think that this is the studies that you will eventually submit as it is. Each of my studies in dissertation are now submitted. 2 of them are published, but they have no resemblance what they were in their dissertation versions.
So once again, this is my personal taste being reflected. So I would say the creativity in forming a dissertation committee can be that you could look for people outside your institution. And the benefit is then you start building your social network in the academic field early on. The other thing to be very thoughtful about is different members of the committee could have very different roles. So the really senior people could act as mentors for the high-level ideas and write those letters that get you a job. But I think it's also smart to have at least one, if not two, assistant professors or mid-level professors in the committee who could work with you on those two other chapters that are not solo authored on a day-to-day basis. So you're going out with either a publication or something that is close to publication. So I think just having a mix in terms of institutions, in terms of seniority, and in terms of the different the skills that the advisors bring. So someone might be a theorist, someone might be an empiricist, would be a smart thing to think about.
Is that once you have your advisor, I think it's always important to have, I mean, it's a basic thing, but it's always important to have someone probably more junior that will help with the day-to-day tasks. And something further is that as long as your advisor is fine and the other person is fine, I think don't also be very scared to onboard people that has a bit more broader scope as you go in the third or fourth person on your committee, because these people also help you a lot, especially as you realize your studies are a bit more, maybe not interdisciplinary, but at least inter theoretical fields. So at least they cover 2 fields or 3 fields. So when I started Industry Revolution, I was very happy with my advisor, but as I moved platform, obviously I needed someone also who knows about platforms, and I naturally onboarded these people basically, and it was a big help to me. One thing I can suggest, transitioning from dissertation to job market, especially in a European context, is that you may think about an external committee member that you would like to likely include in doing a third study of your dissertation. In my case, that was the case how I kind of moved to my postdoc, and that's how I was introduced myself to the external committee member whom I ended up working together with.
Some of the best dissertation advice I got was, or just academic career advice, where one, graduate on a good year, which is completely not helpful because you never know when you graduate. And 2, produce a lot of publications that are very good and try to be a first author in those papers. This is another completely useless advice. The reason why I like those 2 completely useless advice is that I think that there is really no secret to productivity in our field. It's just a lot of hard work. And yes, you can strategize in terms of, finding co-authors and just go and try to get as much feedback as you can, etc. And all these things are super helpful. But at the end of the day, it's just takes hard work.
Lots of students want to graduate with job market ready papers. They think about having a second year paper that rolls out into a paper that they can put into this. They think about another term paper that they can put into their dissertation. And it's a very mechanistic, let's do 3 papers and then put them together and then let's graduate. I think it's a great model. It works, it's efficient. You get to work on it in discrete chunks. Right, and you go from this. So I tell the students, consider the alternative. Right, you are a PhD student. The society pays you enough to keep your body and soul together for 3 or for 4 years, to think deeply, read widely, and perhaps 1 in 10 of you, if you attend, this is like risky innovation, right? If you explore in a PhD student, 1 in 10 of you will move us all forward. But if all of you go towards exploitation and let's get this done, right, the society won't help. And our best brains are our younger people who are widely read, widely exposed to this, have the most energy, interest, and the wherewithal. So I think it's incumbent upon you to consider the opposite, right? Explore, you do your dissertation only once in your life. Take the 2 years. There's a good reason why we give you so much time. So take the 2 years, explore.
especially for the third and fourth years of the PhD, to think about work and life balance. So I had this single-minded idea: the more hours I put in, the better I will be. You know, the PhD is time to do this. Obviously, you need to be super concentrated, and I'm not a good person in being very concentrated. But I think one thing could have helped me a lot, and that's basically having some kind of escape, which can be a healthy hobby of running, or some kind of a routine hobby that you can devote a very determined time, let's say 1 hour every 2 days or something, but you do it especially, you know, to empty your mind, or visiting or seeing your friends regularly. Even that's also very important. And I think I didn't have the chance, but having friends, I think, outside of academia during PhD, I think should also help a lot, because most people, I think, feel lots of pressure on them. So although your colleagues from PhD are great help, obviously, because it's easier to talk about, because they know what you're talking about, I think sometimes it helps a lot also people having friends outside of academia, and seeing them regularly and not basically neglecting them, because that is also important, I think, for the broader creativity and sometimes sanity of your mind. In the lead up to the market, how do you know if you're, say, ready to go on the job market? From my perspective, going on the job market requires three main things. One is you have to have a job market paper. So something, at least in strategy, you have to have something that, you know, you can prepare, that you can talk about if you have a job market visit, that you can present, that showcases your abilities as a researcher and really represents you. Beyond that, you also need, I think, a research identity, which sounds like a big, huge thing. It doesn't mean you have to identify yourself and everything you're ever going to do in the future. But a research identity should be like, what topics are you interested in? So if you're in the TIM Doctoral Consortium, you're interested in technology and innovation management. You're interested in likely innovation. So these are the, like some broad area where someone could say, Colleen is a researcher that's interested in markets for technology and innovative entrepreneurship and corporate innovation. Something along those lines, something that you're known for, a subject that you're known for. And I think also to go on the market, you need visibility in a network. So you need internal to your institution, you need your advisor and your committee and your department to know about your job market paper, to know your research identity, and also they should think that you're ready to go on the market. And then you need, in terms of your sort of visibility, you need some external visibility, which is, in the years leading up to the market, say your third year or your fourth year, you're going to conferences like AOM. People are getting to know you and what you do and what your research is. You're meeting with seminar speakers that come to your school or prior PhDs from your school, or introducing you to other people. So you have, a market, you have an identity, and then people kind of have some sense of who you are, both internally and externally. In terms of when you should go on the market, it's when you have those things and you feel comfortable to go on. What I would say is there's no particular year that you need to go on the market. So staying an extra year, for instance, I don't think that there's any penalties associated with that. It's really about the quality of your research, your paper, your identity, and people knowing who you are. And you're at the stage where you're really ready to then take on the challenges that are associated with.
So I'm trying to think back to all the years, I've seen students in the academy, including my experience. So I feel the rule of thumb might be to go to the market when you have one publication or very close to it, and you have your solo authored idea written up at least as an extended abstract. So it doesn't have to be a paper, but maybe a couple of months before the CCC, you have the data, you have the research question, and you can use the CCC or similar doctoral consortia to get people's reactions to the question and the empirics and the identification strategy and the theoretical contribution. But having that other paper, maybe with an assistant professor, which is almost published, or an advanced R&R, I think is a good signal to the market that you are capable of working on stuff that gets published. Once you go to these conferences, I feel many people will tell you this, you need to have these 30-second versions of your research, 90-second version of your research, and of course, a longer version of the research. And it's very important to have all these three prepared and practiced. So what I did before my CCC was actually wrote it down, I memorized it, I spoke to a mirror, I asked friends to watch me. So I don't think practice can hurt you. But the thing I would say to take the stress out, life in academia is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So I know the job market is uncertain right now, and God willing, it'll pick up. But people change institutions all the time. And so I think of it as something that you want to do for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And we are a relatively small group of people who get to know each other really well. So reputations get formed and they stay a long time, and people move around. So I would say really get to know as many senior scholars as you can without trying to nail that perfect job. So I think that's my advice.
Often near your fourth or fifth year, there will be this thought in the back of your mind about whether I'm ready for the job market. And a few different indicators of whether you're ready include you have some early results from your dissertation work that sound exciting and promising to you and to your committee. You maybe have another paper that is co-authored with your advisor or other PhD students that is further along in the research process. So that would give you 2 out of the 3 chapters of your dissertation. That is a good time to start thinking about your broader committee and going to them and explicitly asking them about your plans. Typically, the December before you think you might go on the market is a good time to do this. You often want a very rough or early draft of your project in even as early as February or March before academy in the summer. And you want to have a version of your materials ready by the summer of the academy when you will go on the market. You will have the chance to update the paper maybe once more, but that would often be with robustness checks and other kinds of details. But the core of your paper should be done by June or July of your job market paper before academy hits in August. Afterwards, you'll be very busy with the application process and interviews, and it'll be very difficult to actually make progress on the paper. That is also the time when you start working on your job talk and the presentation. And so having the paper done at that point is very useful. An important part of your job market packet, in addition to your CV and your research papers, is the research statement. The research statement is the first chance that the committee will have at other schools to look at you beyond you as a single paper or beyond the recommendation letters from your committee. This is a chance for someone who's going to hire you to think about where you're going and what your packet might look like by the time you come up for tenure. What is the set of papers they should get excited about rather than just one key paper that they will be evaluating? This is a time for breadth rather than depth. The structure of a typical research statement includes a paragraph that broadly describes your research field, like some broad topics, say strategic management or strategic human resource management or innovation or entrepreneurship. The types of methods that you typically use in your work, qualitative or quantitative. And basically the first paragraph should help the committee put you in a box. And putting in a box is a good thing because it helps them evaluate you against the standards of that box. So help them really understand what kind of scholar you are. It is also a good time to talk about 2 or 3 broad questions that animate your work. For example, I'm interested in the role of new forms of digital information on innovation, something super broad. After that, you will have a discussion, maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs about your dissertation work. But again, here, don't write about the details, but think about how it contributes to the bigger discussion, both through your other papers, but also to your field, which you just highlighted in the first paragraph. And then talk about 2 or 3 other projects in your packet that flesh out the research agenda. So at the end of the research statement, the person should be left with the following feeling. This is a person who works in area X using Y methods. Their dissertation makes a big makes big progress on this research field by doing ABC. And their dissertation work also sets the stage for these follow-on projects, XYZ, because they had the right data, the right connection. So it shouldn't be completely different, but it's related to your job market paper. And so research statement should be about 2 to 3 pages long. And the basic structure of it is an introduction, short paragraphs about 3 or 4 of your papers and connections between them, and a concluding paragraph. So in some ways, the hardest part about the research statement is a narrative for your work if all your papers are quite different. And that's when talking to your committee and showing them drafts can be quite helpful. You might also look for sample research statements from your colleagues or PhD students. And I learned a lot from reading those, and make sure that you read a few of those before writing your own.
Writing a research statement is actually very, very, very difficult in my view, because it forces you to think about taking a kind of high-level view of the different things you might be thinking about or you might be doing. It forces you to try to see the links that you might not even see on a day-to-day level, and more importantly, to articulate them. So your research statement is essentially a paper, but not about a specific narrow idea. It's a paper about all your research. So you try to figure out what is the know, what is the, how does your research, how is your planned research going to fit with what we think we know? What is wrong with what we think we know? And how your planned research or your current research is helping us move the field forward.
Yes, okay, so I have several thoughts on things to think about as one prepares for the job market. The first is around how to construct elements of your packet to really help maximize your chances of getting a job talk. So, there's a lot of things that you've probably already heard. Focus on having a great dissertation paper, try and get out there, present your work, meet people so they know who you are. But I think also it's important to remember that who writes your letters and how your letters are written can really make a difference as well. Because the people who write your letters are going to be the names that other people will use to sort of discern and vouch for who you are as a scholar, and also what kind of research you do. So it's important to be mindful about who you select. And I think that is in 2 sorts of ways. So on the one hand, picking people that have some sort of overlap with what you're doing is a natural, obvious choice. Probably people on your committee who know your dissertation well, and maybe who've known you throughout your trajectory as a doctoral student is important. However, if you have too much similarity, I think, across your different letter writers, it may not hit all the sort of different facets of people that are within academia, because you're going to have a whole bunch of people reading your application packet who may not know the 3 people who do, research on cognition and innovation. And so those 3 people may mean a lot to a small group of people. So I think the flip side of that then is, yes, have people that, are intellectually compatible with you, but also have some difference from what you're doing and also difference from what one another is doing. And what this means is you want your letter writers to help signal and ping different sort of areas of conversation within the field. So you kind of want to maximize your recognition through sort of the recognition of your letter writers.
In the normal job market, as many of the jobs, most of them are advertised, but some of them are through informal networks, right? So sometimes faculty like us, we already know that a job exists, but that the ads are not yet being put out, right? So it's very important to network. So go to conferences like Academy of Management, even SMS, and attend, our TIM Doctoral Consortium and activities like this. It will help you to network with other junior faculty and a bit more senior faculty, as well as your peers, right? So that's when you kind of hear, oh, this school A and school B, they actually have a job this year, but they are not actually yet, being posted online, right? So, and then also they are, what kind of people are they looking for? Are they looking for special areas? Are they looking for innovation entrepreneurship? Are they looking for strategy? Are they looking for other areas? In terms of, I think, have a job market paper, I think people say job market paper is a place to showcase your ability to do original and interesting novel research. So I will usually have a paper that's either I'm a lead author, or at least I'm I'm not a single author, I'm a lead author, to showcase that this project is yours, right? And I think ideally it should be tied to the core of your research interest or your research topic, right? The theme that you want to present, right? And I will advise that the job market paper to be a bit more polished. So it shouldn't be like early research or like early draft of something. Ideally, you should have presented it at a few places already, hopefully with the help of your PhD peers or colleagues and faculty in your school, and polish it up, right? The presentation, style, and then also the paper itself, because you'll be sending the paper around to your prospective employers, the universities, and also when you present, you should be seen as prepared and confident and ready, right? And that comes with experience, but also a lot of practice. And so I would, advise you to treat this process seriously, and always be more prepared than you think, right?
So once you're on the market and you've submitted your packets and you've gone through the process of maybe interviewing at AOM or doing some pre-Skype interviews, at a certain point you'll get the thing that you've been dreaming of the whole time, which is an invitation for a flyout. So what does a flyout actually look like when you're on the job market? There's lots of heterogeneity, but there's some fairly standard elements that you can sort of come to expect. So you're going to have 1 to 2 days full of meetings with your job market talk at some point in that time, and you're going to sort of fairly little control over when certain things happen during that visit. And then, you're going to have meals with different faculty and et cetera. So basically it's a talk and a set of meetings, adding with getting to the place and leaving. So in order to prepare for that flyout session, what can you do? Do your homework on the school, on the faculty, be prepared for those meetings that you go to. A couple things to keep in mind is that the talk is actually kind of the easy part of a flyout, because you can prepare for that. It's the part that's under your control, really. You can prepare, you can practice, you can be ready for the questions that are going to be asked. That's when you're really on a showcase. The one-on-one meetings that you have are going to be a mixture of talks about your job market paper, about research, about teaching, about the location, about philosophy, about your hobbies. So take those as they come. They will happen, and just sort of keep an open mind. Be prepared with questions, and ensure the questions you want to get answers to, or you get answers. Just some practical tips on that. I would suggest to make checklists for everything, for every visit that you have, because, in terms of packing, the items that you need, the essential items, get an international data plan if you plan on doing international flyouts. So things will happen that you don't expect. So kind of be prepared for those things. Like, for instance, I was on a flyout and I left my glasses on the plane. So I had to do a flyout without my glasses the entire time. I got denied boarding for a flight, which meant that I flew for 30 hours to INSEAD and had like 2 hours sleep, and then had to do my flyout. Everyone will have some sort of story from the job market time. Just be prepared for those things. So,
okay. So in terms of job flyout advice, I guess I'm gonna focus on 2 big mistakes I did. The first one was not sleeping enough. Not sleeping enough might seem like it's a small detail, But when you think that job talks are often in the winter, and that might mean that you're actually making yourself more fragile and more likely to get sick. And I got quite sick during the flyouts, exactly the time where you don't want to be sick. So there were 2 to 3 job talks where I barely could talk because I was coughing so much. And I still feel very sorry for the people who had to take me for dinner, because it was painful for everybody. So make sure that you get some sleep. Don't, no one cares if you push your paper one day forward during that time. You need to relax, you need to sleep, and try to not get sick. So don't make my mistake on that front. Another mistake I've made at the beginning was that you need to be able to stand up for your ideas. And for many people, it's very intuitive. It was not for me. I think it's a matter of being used to it and self-confidence. I'm French, so I came with the idea that, if a professor tells you you're wrong, you must be wrong. This is exactly the wrong approach. And if someone tells you you're wrong, you need to be able to tell the person why they are wrong, or at least stand up for your research. Because if you back down, they will think that you don't know what you're doing. Or even if they give you the benefit of the doubt that maybe you know what you're doing and for some reason you're not acting the way you should, they will think you cannot teach and you're going to be eaten alive by MBA students. So make sure, stay polite, don't be aggressive. But if someone makes a criticism that is not fair to your work, you need to hold your ground.
In your basically job market, you need to think very clearly what is the unique value you can deliver the jobs you apply. And I think this can be represented in a pyramid. At least in my case, that's how I thought about it. Because in my job market, I had a study. My study has a very technical focus. So in that sense, basically, it was really synchronizing very well one part of the literature, one group of scholars that study platform, and they really see the value of this study, but they were the bottom of the pyramid, if I think about it. So when I was interviewing these people in the AOM, they were immediately seeing the value of this study, and I was immediately able to tell, okay, where I want to be in 5 years and how I will build on this, what I can do basically in your institutions, what I can teach, whom I can work with, and so on. But once you realize that, well, if your study is this more technical kind of study, then the people at the upper parts of the pyramid that looked for broader impact, let's say they look to your broader picture and they want to see a clearer picture about you, they become more suspicious. So what then I realize is that for them, I should have come with more abstract terms, and I should actually build in my pitch a broader vision. So I should sell myself as a broader platform innovation scholar rather than someone who is saying, hey, I studied the architecture of the platforms. If the platform has 4 CPUs at the same time, complementary suffer. And then I think this doesn't help when I speak with the people that look for this broader impact.
Practice explaining your work to people that are completely outside of your area, maybe even outside of the field. And I think so much of what we're focusing on when we write our dissertations is, how do I explain to people whose work is close to mine what the value of my contribution is? So you're sort of writing in dialogue with the other people who are studying your phenomenon, your theory, your method. But the job market is mostly interacting with people that don't do the kind of work that you do. And so learning how to explain what you do clearly and what's interesting about what you do in plain language can be really, really, really important. So what I would recommend is find some friends outside of the discipline to just give your elevator pitch to. Say, this is what I study and this is why it's interesting. Practice giving your talks outside of your department, outside of your committee. If there's another department on campus, you could maybe go try and explain to people in the finance department what you do, because you want those blank faces. You want to look for confusion so that you can explain more clearly. Try your mother; it's another good option. So that's helpful, because it helps you clarify and simplify what is exciting and interesting about your work. But it also helps to tease out some things that may be related to what you do in different fields that you had no idea about. Not in order to incorporate it into your work necessarily, unless it makes sense, but in order to speak intelligently both how your work is similar and how it's different. So For example, there may be some construct or something in social psychology that you've never heard of, and so somebody may say, "Isn't this just blah?" And if you give a job talk, highly likely somebody will say, "Isn't this just blah?" Whatever it is. And so not being sort of totally caught off guard or back on your heels or not paralyzed in that moment about, well, what is blah? It just gives you an opportunity to tease out those connections people might make and do a little bit of homework on your end to sort of build those bridges and explain your research clearly and also differentiate it. So one piece of advice that my PhD advisor gave me is that you should always be the person who's most excited about your work in any room that you walk into, because you're going to be the most expert, and it's very hard and impossible to ask somebody else to get excited about something that you're doing if you don't seem that excited yourself. So, and I think this is probably even more likely the case if you're giving a presentation on Zoom or a job talk in Zoom where you can't necessarily, work a room with your body or with eye contact. You just have sort of a room of faces. So I highly recommend practice giving your job talk to yourself in the mirror and watch your face. Watch your eyes. Watch your facial expressions, your tone of voice, because you want to look excited when you're talking about the thing that you've spent years thinking about and working about. And I think that will help people sort of lean in, because if you look excited, people want to know why.
So maybe some advice on job market papers and initial kind of interviews or interaction with faculty. I will actually treat every meetings, whether it's online or in person, face-to-face meeting with faculty, with caution, right? And then I will prepare well, because that's where you start to make an impression, right? So even if it's an informal meeting, right, people start to kind of assess because they are looking for good candidates. So I think always be prepared, right? And I think be prepared to talk about your research in a short version, like 3-5 minutes, or a bit longer version, right? So 15-20 minutes if you have the time to elaborate. And that's where people can get interested and start to ask you questions.
To think about PhD students, and they come really with good training. They've done lots of practice with their job talks, right? And they come and they do, I think they put their best foot forward, and they want to make a good impression. And it's hard to prepare for each institution. If you're meeting the research faculty and things like that, to think about their research and their work they've done. Just that step in terms of then thinking about what questions to ask if they come out to ask questions or anything that they do related to. Just to think about the institution and the research they do. In all the good preparation you do, just take that extra step to reflect on what work's being done.
When we think about the basically job talk visits and the one-to-one interviews, I think it's important to realize that obviously you want to visit institutions where you have lots of overlap and they are like natural, basically your allies in terms of the studies you want to do. It's very easy to communicate, but there are many cases, either you visiting these institutions, there are people who are not directly doing your work, or you may end up visiting institutions where basically it's kind of your second literature or your second alignment, and you feel like, hey, these people are maybe, I'm not sure if they're a great fit, but I really liked here, so I want to, do my best. And these were the two kinds of interviews I freaked out most while doing these one-to-one interviews during the job talks. And what I realized is that when talking with people, don't think, it's great, it's a great dialogue opener when you talk about the same literature and the stuff, it's great, but actually as much as you can relate to these people, how your study can inform at a broader level what these people are doing, or at a greater level as a person. It's very important. These people are looking for a person to work with, as a colleague, but also as a scientific, as a scientific scholar. If you can communicate other broader ideas, I think people are mostly happy, and they actually enjoy also hearing about a different perspective or a different literature. I was even interviewing with departments that study information systems in a qualitative way, And I thought that's a complete opposite. I am currently working in such a department that studies mostly qualitative ethnographic studies, has basically all these different backgrounds. But actually these people was very happy. They were very happy when I talk about my ideas, and when I bring my ideas basically a bit higher level, when I talk them at how they imply and what they imply to what they do, and kind of to enter this dialogue with them. So people enjoy actually.
One thing I'll say about the academic job market process is that at the end of the day, you can only accept one job offer. So that one job offer is what you want to be focused on and getting, and that will help you maintain your mental and emotional sanity in the long process of management and strategy job market that we often face, starting maybe from late July before the Academy of Management meetings and maybe ending sometime mid-January or even as late as early March. The other thing is that it's very difficult to read signals once you have a job interview or once you go for a campus visit. One signal that's often very difficult to interpret is the level of engagement during your job talk. You may walk out of the job talk, and as you have that continuous replay of every conversation and every question, you may be doubting that the level of questioning that you are getting is a signal of increased criticism of your work. It may not be that. It could be that it's actually the faculty members and the audience really becoming excited about your work, really becoming engaged so that they wanted to have that two-way conversation during the job talk with you. And it could be that you walk out of a job talk where nobody asks you a single question and you're like, oh, this is over. Nobody was understanding a single word of what I said. But at the end, you realize that different schools have different cultures. For example, by not raising their hands during the job talk and keeping their questions for one-to-one meetings where they have really understood their research questions, or have the culture of email you their questions and feedback privately later. So one thing to know is to understand the culture of schools where you go to give a job talk, but also not to try to interpret too much of these ambiguous signals that you may be receiving during the process.
My experience is sort of limited in the job market. 2007 was a very good year to graduate. It was before the global financial crisis. I had a good job market year. I had 6, 7 talks, and I had 3 or 4 offers. And perhaps I can talk to you about what did I look for a school when I picked the school. Right? And it was one of the most toughest decisions that I've encountered and had to make and say. And SMU was a young school then. We were started in around 2000, right? And then we talked about this. So I sat down and said what was important for me as a person in this, right? So I looked at what I looked for is a place that supported junior faculty. Faculty were research active, and the support for junior faculty and research activity was more in the systems and routines they had in place, right? So they protected research faculty, junior faculty time by allowing them to perhaps bunch their teaching together or giving them fewer number of preps and then working them through the system of teaching and other things so that they learn the teaching, do well at teaching, but also then have time that then makes them research active and productive. In terms of negotiation and things like this, I think I was really candid with the institutions. It was hard to pick up the phone and say no to a couple of institutions and say the only thing I would say is be candid. It's not a game of one-manship, right? That rookie recruits don't have a killer strategy or a killer things that they do that can blow the people. We sit and recruit junior faculty, and we see junior faculty, right? So we make our best effort. We want junior faculty to come, be research productive, and be successful. That's all institutions are looking for, and see what makes you most comfortable and why, and look at the people who you would think have been made tenure there and were successful there, right? And people also say, if not now, maybe a few years down the road, if you need to move, you would need to think about this.
And one additional piece of advice is that I think do not be afraid to, it may not sound too good at this point, right? But I think do not be afraid to stay on for 1 year or even 2 years as a postdoctoral research fellow, right? So sometimes I think it's more important to be ready for the job market and to find the right fit and the right job than to kind of rush out in that year of graduation, right? Especially in the COVID situation. So sometimes if you go in too early without the proper papers or even good publication pipeline, you might not find the ideal job that fits you, right? While as you stay on for 1 more year, you might be much more prepared and more opportunity might come.
Many of you might be particularly nervous this year because of the macroeconomic situation around us. It's very clear that the job market is going to look very different, and it's possible that there's more competition for a smaller number of jobs. Even though that does make times tough, it's important to recognize that the value of good work in the long run will always be recognized. There are people amongst us who are leading scholars in their field who graduated in 2009 and 2000 when things were difficult, but their work was long-standing and their insights were long-standing, and they will always be recognized in the long run. So that's just important to recognize, is to focus on your work and think about the factors outside of your control as being things that you will react to rather than manage. An important tool in thinking about in these times is to think about the postdoc as a real job option. Postdocs can come in 2 flavors. One is a postdoc that you do alongside accepting a job. So you defer your job by a year and then work on a postdoc and then go to your job. But more often, and that's more likely to be this year, is that you actually graduate from your institution, do a postdoc for a year or 2, and then go on the job market again. Postdocs can be super helpful for a variety of different reasons. First, you can use them to finish and submit papers from your dissertation. I, for example, use my postdoc to completely redo the 3rd chapter of my dissertation and submit it to a journal, and that paper is now forthcoming this year. So I'm super grateful to have that time during my postdoc to be able to work on that project. I also started a new project with a collaborator that we are working on even till this date. Another common use of a postdoc is it's a little bit like your 3rd year. You might have very few responsibilities, and so it's a really good time to collect a new data set that'll hold you in good stead for the next few years, or to learn about a new industry or setting. So often you can do finishing up your dissertation work, getting it under review, and starting a new data set. Now, after having gone through that process, you will be a much stronger job market candidate when you go on the market. Typically, you won't be evaluated that differently than someone who's coming out of a PhD program, but you would have had the extra time to develop your pipeline, maybe get some papers under revision or even published, and to start some new projects. Now, in terms of thinking about choosing postdocs and what might make more sense, look around within your university. There might be other schools or departments that have a postdoc. Those often make a lot of sense because you don't have to move for just 1 year, and that reduces a lot of the costs. You can still be in touch with your committee and get advice for them. Another good source of postdocs are institutions like the National Bureau of Economic Research and independent institutions and think tanks. The nice thing about such postdocs is they might come with very little responsibility in terms of other duties that you might have to do. Postdocs within the field of strategic management are still pretty rare, and so you might have to look around and be creative about different options. The Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico, I heard, has some postdocs that might relate depending on organizational theory. So you really have to be creative in terms of finding postdocs. But if you use them correctly, they can really help you. They can help position you to be a stronger candidate in the market when you go back on the market. And if you already have a job, then they are often a great way to give you a head start on the tenure track. So from both perspectives, they can be really useful to apply. So my advice to you would be to find and apply for postdocs, and then think about them later if you do get accepted. They are useful regardless of whether or not you get an academic job.
From a European context, finding a postdoc, as I talked earlier, it's generally easier when you have this natural connection that either visits your university or that joins as an external committee, but it may well be that you apply for postdocs. And if you think about the postdocs, I find them much more, very useful in my career because I had the time again as a PhD, almost like a PhD, to grow myself, to learn new skills, and to work in close coordination with almost like a second advisor, if you will. And it has tremendously benefited my career. And so you should not think that a postdoc basically is something lesser than a junior position. Especially in Europe, most postdocs are of very high quality, and you will likely increase your placement actually after a postdoc rather than without one. Because once you start position, the teaching loads are generally not very low, especially across Europe, if I think about it. So you will actually have lesser time to grow upon yourself and to apply a second job. But if you're in a postdoc, actually that gives you enough time to work. Your first job is not your last job. And I think this is especially important to think about this, around this, basically having a more of a growth mindset approach to this, especially I think this year, given the bit more challenging job market. We are on the long pace run, and it's not like a sprint that we should do. So I was always very worried, very concerned about my job market. In my first job market, I didn't get that much flyouts, and I was really worried. I thought, hey, I am failed. And that is not how it works, basically. On the longer run, it turned out I can do well. Obviously, I want to do better, but I am very happy now because now I know I already have now the base that I can work on things and I can realize my aims, my academic aims, and I'm very much enjoying my job. And that's how you should think as well. I think it's important to start from a point where you are safe enough to start building blocks on top of it. And you should not think that this is the end point you arrive. Your first starting point is your end point. It's a very long run. And that is, I think, the mindset to keep, especially if you think about this career, as a career, as a life career.
So when I was doing my PhD, I found the transition from coursework to no coursework kind of abrupt and a little bit disorienting, where all of a sudden you're going from hyper-structured tasks with deadlines that are imposed by third parties, grades, here's a reading list, to sort of like, okay, now go, write a paper yourself. And so what I focused on initially was thinking quite intentionally about task structure in my day. So I read a bunch of books that people had written on, how to productively schedule tasks, how to think about, task allocation, how to think about downtime, how to think about, deep work, these sorts of things. And I think I attempted to get extremely structured and intentional in how I was planning my days. And so what was helpful is that I didn't, wake up every morning feeling like, I guess I write a dissertation today. It sort of gave me some anchoring, these are the tasks I do today, this is the point, this is where I go tomorrow, all that sorts of stuff. And what was really helpful about that by the time I became a junior faculty is you start to have demands layered back on top of you. So you start to have, faculty meetings, you teach again, you have competing demands for your time. And so I think developing that muscle to be very intentional with yourself about how you're going to manage your day can make that transition back to sort of, external layers on your schedule much more smooth. And also, time is our finite valuable resource. If you have a muscle on how to be selfish with it and how to use it effectively, I think that first transition can be a little bit smoother. Again, it's going to be bumpy. There is learning that happens in the bumps as well. So Even if it doesn't feel the easiest while you're doing it, that's still for something too. Yeah, so I think practice figuring out ways to structure your tasks and your time that enable you to be productive, happy in your day-to-day, feeling like you're moving along, because that will serve you well.
And I see sometimes assistant professors, they join a new institution, they tend to stay in their own office a little bit more because they are so busy working on research and preparing for their first teaching. But I would actually encourage you to actively socialize with other faculty member in the new institution, because really every department and every institution are very different, right? Some departments focus on certain aspects of research, or they have high preference for some type of papers, or their colleagues are interested in certain themes, right? While other institutions they might be interested in other areas. Some place more emphasis on teaching, some less. So you don't get this when you kind of stay in the office, right, by yourself, right? So you need to go out there and proactively socialize and to talk to senior colleagues and to other young assistant professors, right? And that's where you kind of maintain the group to get informations that will otherwise not be known to you. I think the first few papers are going to be from your doctoral dissertation, and I think it's fair to work with your advisor, right? At least on the first couple of papers, because they have provided great input. They are very knowledgeable. They have been through the R&R process. I think many graduate schools, they don't teach you how to navigate the R&R, right? Revise and resubmit process, and so you really need a senior colleague to kind of take you through it once or twice, and then you work with them closely, and then that's where you also learn a lot. And then once you work with your advisors or committee members for the first couple of papers, I will encourage you to start to be a bit more independent, start new projects, right? Work with more junior colleagues or your peers, other assistant professors who are just as driven as you to do well, to publish in the leading journals. And then that's where you start to build your identity, right? Be coherent. I think do programmatic research. I think that's just very, very important, right? And then over time, you have pipelines, some in early, some in late stage, and then some of these will come through. Some others you will try. And at some point, I think it's also important to learn when to terminate certain papers, right? So if you think some papers are really not looking promising after a few tries, there are some inherent limitation with the data set or with other aspects of the paper, I think sometimes it's better to say, okay, so this is sunk cost, right? So you put it aside and you focus your time on other more promising papers.
First thing that you need to do as an assistant professor is start thinking about your own identity. And one thing that I've seen many people do, many of my friends, my people who came after me in the doctoral classes, they keep working with their advisor far too much, far too long. And I know it's a very hard umbilical cord to cut, but I'm sure advisors would tell you the same, that at some point you need to form your own identity and your own pipeline. And so I guess, of course, complete all the projects you have with your advisor, but start looking for other assistant professors who would be as eager and as hungry as you to get stuff published. And I wish I did that earlier, so I do that a lot now. But in the first 2 years after my doctoral, my dissertation defense, I did not do that, and I wish I did that. You are in that golden phase now where you just do research, you don't do teaching. Don't ever underestimate how much time it takes to do teaching. So the most important thing you could do is to create that pipeline now. So you might be working on your first data set right now. I think it might be a smart strategy to find a second data set that you could really leverage in the first 2 to 3 years of being an assistant professor. And then really reaching out. So if you have your peer co-authorships with other assistant professors who might also have similar data sets, and you have your own data set to offer, I think you could really take off in the first 3 years of being an assistant professor.
Start thinking about which of your peers, who do you know around you that might be good to collaborate with in the future? because once you start at the junior faculty, one of the key things that at least was super helpful for me was to find people at the same stage as I was and who were willing to work on and who were interested in the same thing as I was. And so we could team up and work together. And that was extremely important to my productivity once I got a job. So I think as a PhD student, you can already start thinking about it. Some people even start working with their peers in the PhD program. That's certainly something that I would consider doing, as long as it does not distract you from your dissertation and specifically to your job market paper, which is obviously the most important thing to focus on.
I think now most PhD students are much better trained in terms of, let's say, programming and coding. But I think most of these technical skills, you can always learn and you can always make time, but the best time is the PhD time. So really add as much as skills as you can while doing your dissertation work, whether it's basically writing code for scraping data or right now, right, as the growing influence of machine learning. I think that the initial investment you do in PhD then helps off. It doesn't mean that you need to master everything, but I think it makes it much easier to build on, because once you start the position, then there are more time demands and there are even more life demands. Most of the time you start your position and then there are more life demands that come up together with other, teaching, administrative, other demands you will have. So I think it's important to build some foundation for these other skills you need to build or you want to build in the future. And that was, wish I had been basically more attentive in doing these.
So if teaching standards are high and you have not prepared to teach, or teaching takes a few years for you to learn and establish, right? So if you're miserable in class, right, it's going to have a spillover to other parts of your life. Think about teaching and think about what would you teach and how you would teach, right? And then also think about, by the time you are in your second year or third year, it's a process of self-discovery. You will know what kind of teacher you are, what kind of a person you are, what ways do you think for you the material will resonate, and for the students, right? It'll take you time. So it'll take you 2-3 years. You can help this entire process by focusing on what you do, what you want to do, picking an institution that gives you this time to settle down and do.
I think it actually varies greatly from school to school. If you are in a research university, the emphasis tends to be on research, right? But I think you want to get your teaching off to a good start, so you don't have to worry about it. Right? You don't have to be the star teacher or the star, educator, But I think you should consistently kind of work on your teaching. Get help, right? As much as you can from your colleagues in your new institution. Most of the courses, to be honest, have been taught, right? So you don't have to reinvent the wheel and spend a ton of time designing an entirely new course, right, in your first year. Do a good job in teaching, try to get it right, and every subsequent year, then you just need to put in time to fine-tune, improve on it slightly, but you don't have to invest a whole chunk of time, right? Then you can focus a lot more on research, and that's where I think your mobility comes from, and that's where I think a lot of the value add as an academic in a research university come from.
So teaching, I feel, probably comes naturally to some people and not naturally to others, and I was in this others category. So my first teaching evaluation were pretty horrible. In my case, the problem was a matter of self-confidence, right? So you stand up in front of people but your age, sometimes a bit younger, sometimes you feel a bit older, but they're about your age, and they know they know firms much better than you do because you've just come out of your PhD, and it can be quite intimidating. So what I find really helpful has been to people will give you a favor by giving you handing you some material and tell you just teach that. That is a favor in a sense, but it's not a favor in another sense, right? So you really need to know the material inside out to be confident with that material. So I highly recommend that even if someone hands you a course that's already done, that you heavily invest in rewriting the course and make it sense of it, putting yourself in the course. And that's helpful also in a sense that students appreciate when they feel that the course is something that's personal, that really resonates, not only with them, but also with the faculty who teaches it. So if you can put personal anecdotes, I find that that's quite important, and that gives you credibility. I invested a lot in teaching early on. Part of it was because I didn't have a choice. I really started from a very low point. I find that it's helpful to learn to teach, because once you know how to teach, then everything gets easier and you have more time for research. You also stress less about it, and your life is better overall. So if you spend time finding jokes that are related to architectural innovation, then do it, right? You can reuse those jokes for the years to come. If a tip that I actually found that is probably quite obvious to many people, and for some reason was not to me, was that if you are not a very confident teacher, and it took me a few years to become one, have speakers. It's just stupid. Just don't do the teaching yourself, right? As much as you can, you'll still be evaluated, and you'll get better ratings, because the students, even if they don't like you, they will enjoy the speakers. So there are tricks like that you can develop to become a good teacher, or at least while you gain the confidence and the techniques to become a good teacher, you can do that to survive.
Right. And I encourage a junior assistant professor to serve as reviewers on leading journals, research journals. I think these reviews are really helpful for you as well, because you kind of learn how people write and what are the comments from other more senior reviewers and what do editors think. So you get kind of the both side of the perspective. I think that is really helpful as you try to navigate the R&R process and as you try to publish your first couple of papers.
I mean, it sounds very cliche, but the friends you make in your doctoral program and the friends you make in your doctoral consortiums are the friends you keep for a much longer period of time. It's just, I think there is a trust, and there's a level of comfort, and then the level of knowledge that people build up. I'm not talking about just instrumentally becoming co-authors or doing projects together or things like that, right? But it's also a support network that you could send an email and say, hey, this is going on, or I need advice on this. I encourage you to make friends at the doctoral consortiums and take a look at your peers in your PhD cohorts carefully and maintain and sustain these relationships.
So a couple of the things that I've done, in my first couple years of being an assistant professor that have helped, I think, for me to be more productive and to help sort of transition from being a PhD student to now you're on the tenure track. There's a lot of different responsibilities that you have. Number one, I would say set up a research group with your peers in some way. So an informal kind of brown bag, whether that's local people at your school, or you can do it now, we're all great on Zoom. You can do a virtual weekly or monthly brown bag with a set of scholars that are about your same level, where you can go through early stage ideas, where you can get feedback on presentations that you're preparing.
And also I encourage you to, maybe through TIM Doctoral Consortium or other consortium, or even in your own network, to maintain a good group of junior faculties or peers who are 1 year, 2 years above or 1 year below you, because this is just so important as a support group, right? You guys can work on research together. Even not working on research together, you can provide advice, right, for one another, right? Whether it's the R&R process, whether it's that other paper that didn't get through because you had certain issues, and peer helpful reviews, friendly reviews for one another. And then also, I think, stay focused, right? Don't be too distracted. I know sometimes it's very tempting to go for that consulting opportunity. It's very tempting to teach the extra, executive, EMBA class. But I think the first few years, especially if you are in a research institution, you should really try to focus and think about the 3-5 year kind of timeline, how you want to take your research program, what kind of data you need, who you might want to collaborate with, and start to build your network. So I think all this take time, right? So I think stay focused.
Another thing that I found really helpful when I was, I think I started this when I was a third-year doctoral student, is a group of PhD students across multiple different institutions, so nobody at my home institution. There were 6 of us. We got together and formed a writing group. And so we met every single week on Skype, and every week 2 people would submit 5 pages of writing. And we were, different areas within the field. As I mentioned, different doctoral institutions, we had different methods, but that sort of forcing mechanism to, I owe somebody 5 pages. It was really, really helpful, both to get to, move stuff along, but then also to engage in conversation about your work with peers and colleagues that.
Well, if I can think about one important tip, networking in advance of the job market, either this year or in the future, especially in these times, I think it's important to join in virtual events. There are many virtual events we have, right? We have events at the AOM or at the SMS, and I have seen in some of these events, basically some candidates were already having some chit-chat with the potential basic hirers. In my case, I think joining, for example, the Turkish STR talk, I think was helpful for some of the candidates. And I think there are these talks in many languages and for many communities right now. So it's important, I think, to be a bit more regular in your community's virtual events.
Right. And also, I think attend seminars, try to present, I think doctoral consortiums, doctoral seminars where faculty will attend. You will make a first impression, right, on faculty. They will hear about your research, they will learn about what you're doing, and then sometimes, they will be, impressed, or they will understand, where you're coming from, and they could extend an invitation, right? And also reach out to alumni, people who graduated 1, 2, 3 years or even more before you, and they will be in the best position to kind of give you some insights, information about job hunts and what openings and how do you do well on the job market. And in the COVID situation, I think it's a little bit special. So we have a lot more of this online seminars and conferences, and many of these are free. So I actually encourage doctoral students to attend them. You actually see more senior faculties, and you can always stay on behind, several minutes to chat, right, with the faculty after the formal presentation, and then they will, take an interest on, what kind of research you're doing, and again, they will kind of form the first impression. Right. So, and then you can always follow up with a thank you email, a few words about your research, even a recent paper you had. And again, that's a very nice way to start the networking process. Even you can't see them face to face, right? So this is, I think, the Zoom platform and other platforms are really nice, right, in that sense. And sometimes you just have to kind of wake up really early, or stay really late, right? So that would be still fine, but you get access to a broader kind of spectrum and different schools.
So I would say the following. I would say that the virtual remote work model really enables people to knock doors easy. So, at least in the case of organizations, what I've found is that if a very junior level person joins the company, he or she might be hesitant to go to the 7th floor where the CEO and the CXO sit and knock the door. But it's very easy to send someone a Slack message or even an email and ask a question. So don't be shy in reaching out, and you might be surprised in how many people will reach back. And one beautiful piece of advice I recently heard myself from Aya Chakar on a different panel was, she mentioned she has this best practice of not sending people the entire paper, because people are really busy. You have to understand senior scholars are super busy. But if you send people like a 2-page introduction, chances are they're going to read it. And if you put that introduction in the email body itself, they might read it within the next 3-4 days and give you some quick reactions. So I feel if you have an idea you're working on, which might become your solo authored paper, find the people who are relevant for that literature. And if you cite them, or even if it's tangential to the interests, you could compose a 2-page extended abstract or a 3-page abstract and email it to them and then see how many people will react. So I think that might be a really quick way and efficient way to get lots of feedback without leaving your home. So I'm going to talk about this conceptual tool that I've been calling virtual water coolers, which works beautifully in a remote world. So the idea of a virtual water cooler is that these are random interactions between people. So the group is created, constructed randomly, but someone is planning. So it sounds counterintuitive that you're both planning a set of interactions that are randomly generated, but that's how it works. And the idea is to mimic and even get better than those serendipitous cafeteria or water cooler conversations. So I work with these all remote organizations such as GitLab and Zapier, and they don't have even one single physical office. And what they do is they have someone in the company who creates these Zoom calls, which are randomly constructed, where someone from marketing, someone from sales, someone from service, they come together every Monday morning and for 45 minutes and talk about life or the weekend. And I feel the virtual world can really break down those silos in the doctoral community and the community of assistant professors as well. So why not people from strategy talk to people from entrepreneurship? Why not people from entrepreneurship talk to people from marketing? So, but also break these silos across institutions, across continents. So if doctoral students are hearing this, I would strongly suggest some of you become those planners, get these lists of doctoral students across different years, and start planning these random interactions once a week, once a fortnight, where people can talk about what's going on with life, what's going on with research. And you never know who's going to become a co-author in 2 years, or what topic might ignite a spark in your own mind. So that's one thing, one concrete idea I would suggest.
In organizing this consortium, Mikhail and I have benefited from the help of several of our colleagues in the TIM division and beyond. Especially, we would like to thank Marianne Feldman and Alyssa Operti for putting together the TIM division's PDW program. Elena Novelli has been extremely helpful in getting the financials in order. Additionally, we are grateful to the financial sponsorship of the TIM division, as well as the University of North Carolina's Keenan Institute for Private Enterprise.